Well, good evening. I'm the executive director, Christina Schutt, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. Tonight's program examines the potential and perhaps the pitfalls of emerging artificial intelligence program such as Chat GPT. In fact, I'm frankly just biding my time until a robot replaces me. But, you know, I don't know that the robot will dress as cute as me, so there's that. In the meantime, we hope that you will enjoy not just tonight's program, but some of our upcoming programs. In fact, I'll be your host for History Happy Hour on Wednesday, June 22nd at Anvil and Forge, just down the street and around the corner from the ALPM. Join us after work at 5:30 to lift a pint or two as we put the spotlight on museums in the movies and how movies have portrayed museums during a fun and engaging program that I hope you'll enjoy. And if you haven't done so already, please make time to visit our new exhibit just across the entryway there in the Illinois Gallery, Here I Have Lived, Home in Illinois. This exhibit highlights the stories of Illinoisans and what life has meant to them, what home, and creating a sense of home. Plus, on several dates in June, we'll have a local string quartet that recorded Randy Irwin's original score for the exhibit soundtrack. And we'll be performing that soundtrack live in the gallery. And of course, you can check out all of our upcoming events on the events page at presidentlincoln.illinois.gov. Plus, click on the link for Team Lincoln and join our exclusive members program. And I also want to thank all of our Team Lincoln members who are joining us this evening. There are really lots of great perks, and the membership program is one of the only ways that you can experience that, including other types of cool tech programs that we've done just for Team Lincoln members. And in addition to that, of course, you get free admission all year to the ALPM. Now, I hope you'll join me in welcoming our ALPM Tech Director and Tech Extraordinaire here, Jeff Nevins.
Well, thank you, Christina. Good evening and welcome to the Union Theater and our special presentation, Our 16th President in the 21st Century, Lincoln and Artificial Intelligence. Our focus tonight is on the capabilities and limitations of artificial intelligence, specifically OpenAI's Chat GPT, and also how it can be used and abused when telling the stories of our past. This is not going to be a deep dive into artificial intelligence. This is more a 1,000-foot overview. Like Christina said, my name is Jeff Nevins, and I'm the technical director here at the library and the museum. I first want to tell you I am not an expert in AI or ChatGPT, but rather someone who understands how we currently use technology to inspire civic engagement through the diverse lens of Illinois history and to share the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln. Joining me on stage tonight are some of the finest historians ever assembled anywhere, and I'm privileged to call them my colleagues. Dr. Christian McWhirter, here on the end, is our Lincoln historian, and he's the author of Battle Hymns, The Power and Popularity of Music in the Civil War. Dr. Jacob Freefeld, next to me here, is our Illinois and Midwest Studies historian and the author of Homesteading the Plains, Toward a New History. His forthcoming book, The First Migrants, How Black Homesteaders' Quest for Land and Freedom Heralded America's Great Migration, will be released in August. Dr. Ian Hunt, down here on the far end, is our Chief of Acquisitions and Special Projects. Under his leadership, we have acquired such artifacts as a Lincoln Bible and the Volk bust that was once on display in the Lincoln home over at 8th and Jackson. Dr. Brian Mitchell is our Director of Research and Interpretation and the author of Monument, Oscar Dunn and His Radical Fight in Reconstructionist Louisiana. He is also the co-author of Blood in Their Eyes, The Elaine Massacre of 1919. I asked ChatGPT to write an introduction for itself, for an audience of historians and history fans, and here is, in part, what it said. ChatGPT can be a little chatty. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished historians and fellow enthusiasts of history, it is an honor to address you today. My name is ChatGPT, and I am an AI language model created by OpenAI. I have been trained on a wide range of texts, including historical accounts, scholarly articles, and various literary works to develop a deep understanding of human language and knowledge. As a conversational AI, I am designed to engage in natural language conversations and provide information, insights, and assistance on a wide array of topics, including history. While I do not possess personal experiences or emotions like a human, I have been trained on a vast collection of historical records, allowing me to explore and discuss various historical periods, events, and figures. Please keep in mind that my knowledge cutoff is in September 2021, so I may not have information on recent events. Nevertheless, I am eager to be a part of your historical inquiries and discussions, and I look forward to our intellectual journey together. Wow. Thank you. Very polite robot. So for those of you who are a little more versed in ChatGPT and AI, I will add a little additional information. For the purposes of this evening's event, we are using ChatGPT version 3.5. When we began developing this program back in February, version 4.0 was not available yet, and in the words of Lincoln, we decided not to switch horses midstream. Version 3.5, which is what we're using, uses over 175 billion parameters to learn and respond to users' questions. So we throw around billion and million and trillion a lot. So to put this in perspective, 1 million seconds ago was Saturday, May 13th, around 11 a.m. 1 billion seconds ago was October of 1991. And 175 billion seconds ago was 3522 BCE, or right around the dawn of recorded history. So to give you an idea of how much information it's going through. We asked ChatGPT a few questions in advance and recorded the responses so we could better analyze the responses. Later in the program, we'll ask some questions in real time, and then we'll open it up to you for questions either for ChatGPT or questions for our historians' take on certain aspects of this. So without further ado, here is our first question. Nick, if you'll go ahead and play the video.
The relationship between Abraham Lincoln and Anne Rutledge is the subject of much speculation and debate among historians. According to historical accounts, Lincoln and Rutledge knew each other and were acquaintances in New Salem, Illinois, during the 1830s. There are claims that Lincoln had strong feelings for Rutledge and that they may have been in love. However, the precise nature and depth of their relationship remain uncertain. Some historians argue that Lincoln's relationship with Rutledge was platonic and that any romantic attachment between them is largely speculative. They suggest that Lincoln's feelings for Rutledge may have been exaggerated over time due to the tragic circumstances of her early death. Anne Rutledge passed away in August 1835, at the age of 22, reportedly due to typhoid fever. It is important to note that the available historical evidence is limited, and there are varying interpretations of Lincoln's relationship with Rutledge. While there are accounts and testimonies that hint at a possible romantic connection, definitive proof is lacking. As a result, the extent of Lincoln's love for Anne Rutledge remains a subject of historical interpretation rather than a matter of confirmed fact.
All right, gentlemen, how did it do?
I'll start by setting the table because I'm the one who picked this question. Just for those of you who don't know about this controversy, I assume most people probably here do. But so the Anne Rutledge story, one of the reasons why this seemed like a good question is because it's one of the controversial parts of Lincoln's story and one of the parts that is mostly based on hearsay, so we don't know a lot about it, and different people over time have come to wildly different speculative conclusions about it, ranging anywhere from Anne Rutledge didn't actually exist to Lincoln was so madly in love with Anne Rutledge that he never really loved Mary Lincoln and he never got over it, right? So we thought this would be a good question to ask ChatGPT to see how it handled a question with a lot of gray area built into it. And especially since, as we heard from Jeff, it's very proud of the number of historical records it claims to have access to. So how would it sort all those out, right? So.
Yeah, I was actually pretty surprised how well it answered this question. I didn't think it would do well with like interpretive questions, but it threaded the needle better than a lot of my students did when I taught history.
I agree. I like its use of the word speculative and analyzing what's going on. However, there are details which it could have added, that are in letters and in writings subsequent of Lincoln's death that would have shed some light on what was going on.
I wonder later on maybe we'll press it and say, well, when are the accounts that say he loved Anne Rutledge? What year are those from?
Right.
To give us maybe a better idea.
Yeah, it does the undergrad paper trick where it just says according to historical accounts. It isn't specific. But to be fair to it, it is, if you can ask follow-up questions, right? And we might do a little bit of that later, like Jake said. And one of the follow-up questions you can ask is, like, cite your sources, and it'll tell you what its sources are.
All right. Next one?
Sure.
All right. Go ahead with the next one, Nick.
Yes, Abraham Lincoln is often regarded as an abolitionist, although his views on slavery evolved over time. While he did not start his political career as an abolitionist, he held strong moral objections to slavery. As the 16th President of the United States, serving from 1861 until his assassination in 1865, Lincoln played a crucial role in the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States. During his early political career, Lincoln expressed a desire to prevent the spread of slavery into new territories, rather than outright abolishing it. However, his opposition to the expansion of slavery, along with his belief that it was morally wrong, positioned him as an opponent of the institution. Over time, Lincoln's views on slavery became more firmly abolitionist. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by Lincoln in 1862, declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. Although this proclamation did not immediately end slavery, it marked a significant step towards its eventual abolition. Lincoln's commitment to ending slavery was further solidified with the passage of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution in 1865, which formally abolished slavery throughout the country. Despite his evolving stance, it is important to note that Lincoln's primary focus during the Civil War was preserving the Union. However, his actions and policies, including the Emancipation Proclamation and the support for the 13th Amendment, played a pivotal role in advancing the cause of abolition and ultimately ending slavery in the United States.
What's that?
So this one was a very interesting one to me in that it has what I call a seesaw effect. Chat GPT makes one declaration in one direction and then it seems to pivot 180 degrees and go back the other way. It claims that he was absolutely an abolitionist, which Lincoln himself would have told you in 1860 he was not an abolitionist. He was always against the institution of slavery, but he was certainly not on the level of a William Lloyd Garrison or a John Brown or any of those types of figures. But then as ChatGPT goes on in its statement, then it goes back and says, well, he was really focused on reunifying the country and bringing the South back in. But then it seems to also shift back and say, well, you know, Emancipation Proclamation and 13th Amendment bring him back into the abolitionist fold. So to me, it doesn't really want to place a firm answer on whether or not Lincoln was an abolitionist. So it gives you yes and no answers throughout.
Do you think part of that, too, is how ChatGPT has been programmed to define what an abolitionist is?
Exactly. That was what I was going to point out, is it never defines what an abolitionist is. We know that abolitionists came on gradients. You know, those who saw African Americans as equals, those who may have wanted to abolish slavery and colonize African Americans somewhere else, and those who believe that the institution was abhorrent and that they should have better rights, not necessarily equal rights, but more rights than they were exercising at that point.
Yeah, I mean, historians always swim in a sea of context, right? And
right.
so ChatGPT leaves out the context. I mean, if Abraham Lincoln comes out in 1860 and says, I'm an abolitionist, I don't know if he ever becomes president. But by 1865, once you're supporting the 13th Amendment, clearly you are an abolitionist. And I mean, it'd be nice if ChatGPT could give more context to what's going on in the world Lincoln is inhabiting, although that would have been a much longer answer than this already long answer.
Yeah, I'll try not to do exactly that and give a long answer because there's a lot I want to say about this. So, I mean, Lincoln, so again, like the Anne Rutledge thing, people have been arguing about, even more so than Anne Rutledge. The argument about Anne Rutledge started after Lincoln died. The argument about whether Lincoln is an abolitionist occurred during his lifetime and was quintessential to the decision of the slaveholding states to secede, because they believed him to be an abolitionist, and they said so in their ordinances of secession. Lincoln himself consistently rejected that label and never embraced it his entire life. In Lincoln's mind, and in the mind of many people, an abolitionist was someone who believed in destroying slavery outside of the rule of law. Lincoln never did that, right? All the ways Lincoln attacked slavery were within what he believed was his power and the rule of law, right? The Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment. So this is an argument we've been having since his own lifetime and had severe consequences for American history. So there's that. The other thing I want to point out, and I'm going to throw in a thing I think we're going to talk about throughout this, is what is Chat GPT really doing? So the reason Chat GPT doesn't define abolitionists, and the reason it adopts, I think, a simplified view, an overly simplistic view of what abolitionist means, is because mostly what Chat GPT is doing is just pulling information randomly off the internet from various sites that it has access to. I mean, I don't want to diminish too much what it's doing, but a lot of what it's doing is just what Google does, except it's formatting it in sentences and paragraphs. And so the internet has an extremely simplistic view of what an abolitionist is, right? It's the kind of answer you would get if all you did was Google abolitionism and then try to piece together a 3-paragraph answer. That's its understanding of abolitionism. It does not have a complicated idea of what that is, and that's because of what it's actually doing. It's not actually thinking about an answer and reasoning an answer for you. It doesn't understand the context Jake is talking about. It doesn't even understand why giving Lincoln that label is controversial and led to secession, right? So I think that's what's going on too.
There are a couple of important caveats, though.
Okay.
It's improving itself all the time and extremely rapidly. There are questions that we've asked it a week ago that we got totally the wrong answer for, that we've asked this week, and it's corrected those answers. So it's improving itself all the time. So we don't know how long it will take until we have a really workable model that's pretty accurate, that actually looks at a broad array of sources.
Well, yeah, I think if you're writing an essay, if there are any students in the audience, if you're writing an essay, ChatGPT, like Wikipedia, is a great place to start. It's a bad place to finish.
Right.
Take the next research.
Excellent.
Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah, and asking it follow-up questions is useful, especially where if you were to ask it, what's an abolitionist? Now, we didn't ask that, but see what kind of answer it gives you. But I think we'll dip our toes in that a little later. So yeah, I'll hold off on going too far on that.
All right. Next question.
Yes, Abraham Lincoln did interact socially with African Americans during his lifetime. Although he lived in a time of widespread racial discrimination and slavery in the United States, Lincoln held progressive views on the issue of slavery and racial equality. As president, Lincoln had several interactions with African Americans, both in official capacities and in more informal settings. For example, he appointed Frederick Douglass, an African American abolitionist, as a consultant during the Civil War and sought his advice on matters concerning African American troops and emancipation. Lincoln also had meetings with other prominent African American leaders and activists, such as Sojourner Truth and members of the abolitionist movement. Moreover, there are accounts of African Americans visiting the White House during Lincoln's presidency. One notable instance is the story of Elizabeth Keckley, a former slave who became a successful seamstress and confidant to Mary Todd Lincoln. Keckley interacted with both Abraham Lincoln and his wife on various occasions. It is important to note that while Lincoln advocated for the emancipation of slaves and took steps towards their liberation, his interactions with African Americans were not free from the racial prejudices prevalent during that era. Nevertheless, Lincoln's interactions with African Americans, particularly those who fought against slavery and for equality, played a role in shaping his evolving views on racial issues.
Okay. That response is inaccurate for a number of reasons, and I think a lot of it is the definition of socially. So what do we mean by social interaction? When I think of social interaction, I'm looking at interactions beyond the professional range, interactions that include friendships, and we can't really say that Abraham Lincoln had very many of those. He had a black barber, we know that. We know that he has black neighbors. We don't know that those neighbors come over. We don't know that if he engages them socially and hangs out with them. Keckley what's the barber's name?
William
Florville.
Yeah, Florville, William Florville. We know that he existed, but his relationship isn't a social one with Lincoln. So I think that's very, very interesting that it would equate these very professional connections to Lincoln to something that is social.
And it does the thing that we're here in Springfield, and what drives us crazy? Nobody wants to talk about Lincoln before he arrives in Washington, right? And look how quickly. It's like, let's get to D.C. Let's talk about Douglas. Let's talk about Sojourner Truth. It doesn't mention Florville. It doesn't mention Jameson Jenkins.
Slate.
William Johnson.
Yeah, right. It doesn't mention William Johnson. Yeah, who's absolutely, someone, again, close to Lincoln. Whether he's socially close, professionally close, we can argue about, but absolutely. And yeah, that's what drives us crazy, right? And there's Chat GPT replicating that cliche as well.
So, stemming off that in our conversation, we asked that question, and then we immediately followed it with this question. Go ahead, Nick.
Abraham Lincoln's barber in Springfield, Illinois was William Florville. He was a skilled barber who regularly cut Lincoln's hair and trimmed his beard. Florville, an African-American, operated a barbershop in Springfield and was well known in the community. He had a friendly relationship with Lincoln and would often engage in conversations with him while providing his grooming services.
So, who caught it? Right away, it makes a huge mistake.
Right.
Right, Lincoln doesn't have a beard, right? Right. Florville isn't trimming Lincoln's beard.
Right.
So right away, right, and we're starting to get into, like, you'll start to see, it makes these little mistakes here and there. And unless you know, you're not going to catch it, right? And it just...
But the second you correct it, then it's corrected in the model.
Right.
And
maybe, but I mean...
If you're looking for black people Lincoln knew socially, and you don't know William Florville exists...
well, that too, right.
You can't get there,
yeah.
And, I guess give him a shave could be considered trimming his beard, right? So it's a radical trim.
Yeah, a radical. And we tried introducing newly discovered figures, or figures that weren't at least written about heavily until after 21. And two examples of that, one example was Oscar Dunn. We asked it who Oscar Dunn was. It had no idea. Now it actually knows who Oscar Dunn is. Another figure that we asked questions about was the first African-American officer killed in the Civil War, a man by the name of Andre Caillou. And it did know who Andre Caillou was, but there were several aspects of his life that were inaccurate. One of those was the fact that he died and is buried, but for some reason, it also believed that he was in the legislature during Reconstruction. So if he dies in the first siege on Port Hudson during the Civil War, how is he serving as a legislator after the Civil War?
So again, they come back to what Jake said. Like I think it's useful, and even if we keep feeding it information, I think its main use is just going to be. Again, I hate to keep comparing to Google because it's obviously better than Google, but like it's just a useful place to start with these things, right? You can learn a little bit about Florville, but what you really need to do is then you need to take other steps. You need to find books that use heavily cited material. You need to look at, Florville wrote a letter to Lincoln after Willie dies, and that's easily available online. Like, you need to find these things yourself, right? Its usefulness, I think, is, I don't know, what's...
I think that there are two ways that I see this being used with historical information. First, asking it about sources. Right? What are the leading books on this topic? The second is actually paraphrasing things that you've already written, or grammar checking things that you've already written. It's very, very good at that, at natural language.
Yeah, that's the miracle. To me, the miracle of Chat GPT isn't what it knows; it's how it writes, right? That it's able to, that a computer is able to convincingly give you those paragraphs. I think that's the achievement, right? But yeah.
Okay, so we're going to play with some dates here and see how ChatGPT does. Nick, go ahead and go with the next question.
On November 19, 1863, Abraham Lincoln was participating in a significant event in American history known as the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln was the President of the United States at that time, and he traveled to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to deliver a speech at the dedication ceremony for the Soldiers' National Cemetery. The Battle of Gettysburg, a pivotal battle of the American Civil War, had taken place several months earlier, resulting in a significant number of casualties. The cemetery was established to bury the Union soldiers who lost their lives in the battle. Abraham Lincoln delivered his speech, the Gettysburg Address, during the dedication ceremony. The address lasted for only a few minutes but became one of the most famous speeches in American history. In it, Lincoln emphasized the principles of equality, liberty, and democracy, reaffirming the Union's purpose in fighting the Civil War and honoring the sacrifices made by the soldiers. So, on November 19, 1863, Abraham Lincoln was delivering the Gettysburg Address, immortalizing himself as one of the most iconic figures in American history.
So leave that answer up because I just praised it for how it writes. But if I got handed that first paragraph from a student, that's a terrible first paragraph because all it needs to do is tell, right, on November 19th, Abraham Lincoln was at the dedication of the Gettysburg National Cemetery. That's all it needs to say, right? But it says it to you two different ways, right? It's sloppy writing. So I wanted to point that out.
Can you tell he worked as a journal editor?
Yeah. But mostly that answer was right? So, yeah.
Right. And this, exposing my ignorance as a non-historian, was the cemetery only for Union soldiers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, that just came to me as we were going through it. So you had something.
Well, I was going to say, unlike the Anne Rutledge question or even the question about interactions with African Americans, the Gettysburg Address has been written about ad nauseum. There are so many books dedicated just to the speech itself. There are so many books dedicated to the battle. Every biography of Lincoln dedicates, at least a chapter on the speech. So it has so many data points to draw from that I would have been shocked had it significantly erred with the history that it was offering to us, because that's you don't read a Lincoln book without reading about the Gettysburg Address.
We also included date questions because the best resource for finding out what Lincoln did on any particular day is a digital resource that we offer, the Lincoln Log, which you can Google that and use it. And it will tell you every day of Lincoln's life where we know what he was doing and where he was. We tell you, and then we provide citations. We built it from the kind of classic book Lincoln Day by Day, and then we turned it into a database. And we wanted to see if it had access to that database. We figured out it doesn't, because it doesn't know certain days where Lincoln was. But that was one of the other reasons why we focused on that, was to see, right, because it's where it's drawing. So that's a good example of what Brian's talking about. Eventually, presumably, it will find the Lincoln Log, which will make it better at answering those kind of questions, and will provide better citations, because it will just regurgitate our citations. Now, the other problem people have with Chat GPT is how does that affect things like copyright and plagiarism, right? And that's a whole other conversation, but currently it does not seem to know that we offer this resource.
And if historians aren't writing new histories,
right,
and aren't looking at nuances and connections, then it limits the number of sources it has to draw from eventually.
Yeah. Right. So before this next question, does everyone know that Abraham Lincoln died on April 15th, 1865, right? Like that's all, we're all aware of that. Okay, Nick, let's go ahead with the next question.
On April 20, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was in Washington, D.C., performing his duties as the President of the United States. Just 5 days earlier, on April 14, Lincoln had been assassinated at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth. He was seriously injured and remained in a coma until his passing on April 15, 1865. Therefore, on April 20, 1865, Lincoln was lying in state at the White House, where mourners and dignitaries paid their respects before his funeral took place.
Now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because I think you're going to say something.
Believe it or not, this is the second time we've asked it this question, and this is a better answer than the first time. The first time, I think it had Lincoln at Seward's funeral on April 20th.
Well, he was attending Seward's funeral.
He was attending Seward's funeral.
And was still doing the business of the presidency, even though he'd been dead for 5
Well, it was specific.
5
I think it
days.
said Lincoln was dealing with the aftermath of the Civil War and Reconstruction, which, I mean, I guess is true. But not in the way Chat GPT probably thought he was.
No. Right.
Yeah. But this happened a lot. So we didn't include, right? We didn't include
No.
So
dates, no.
we did a similar thing with it with Lincoln, where we tried to ask it specific days, and we got it to say, right, that Lincoln was, I'm trying to remember exactly how this went, that Lincoln
asked him-
won his Senate election, right?
Oh, that's right.
Right. And we asked, there was a certain date we asked when he would have been, it was after he had been a representative.
Right.
And it was telling us that he was in Washington serving as a representative.
Yes.
When he had already
When
left.
he had already left Washington.
And yeah, and in 59, it said he was in the Senate preparing to run for president, which, no, he wasn't. He lost that election.
Yeah.
So, and that was through asking it follow-up questions about dates. So it can get confused. Why it does that, you know, we're not computer scientists. I don't know. But it was an interesting, it was the way we got it to kind of screw up the most, right? Was to ask it about those kind of things.
Which again, I thought that it would be flipped, right? I thought it would have
Yeah.
more trouble with the general stuff and be really good with specific dates. Right?
Yeah, I did too. Okay, next question, please, Nick.
Mary Todd Lincoln did not call off her wedding to Abraham Lincoln. In fact, Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln were married on November 4, 1842. Their wedding took place in Springfield, Illinois, and they went on to have 4 children together: Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas, also known as Tad. It is worth noting that Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln had a complex relationship, and they faced numerous challenges throughout their marriage, including the loss of their children and the stresses of Abraham Lincoln's political career. However, there is no historical evidence to suggest that Mary Todd ever called off their wedding.
So this is a reference, this was Brian's idea, but it's a reference to the fateful 1st of January 1st, 1841, when Lincoln's engagement to Mary collapses and Lincoln becomes almost suicidal. What actually happened on that day, people don't really know, and they've been arguing about. And which one of them called it off? I mean, it seems more likely Abraham did than Mary, but we don't really know. That's what we're asking about. It clearly has no idea this event even ever happened and doesn't know how to interpret it at all. So, I mean, I guess technically it's right, because if you believe that Mary wasn't responsible for the breakup, then, you know, I guess it's right, but clearly it just doesn't even know that this happened, right?
I think what I was attempting to do in asking that question is ask something that only historians of Lincoln would know.
It's really in the weeds on the Lincoln story.
So, you know, if it has access to everything written before 2021, you know, how much reach does it actually have?
Right.
And that shows you how limited the reach was. At least the reach was that day, by that day. We don't know what the reach is today. How many nodes of information, how many points.
Yeah.
And I keep comparing it to a student, but like it does one of those things students do, and I did when I was a student, where if it doesn't know the answer, it throws a bunch of facts at you so it can still get a good grade, right? And so, like, it's especially funny to me that it says, it lists the names of the kids, but it only tells you Tad's nickname, but they all had nicknames, but it knows, like, Tad had a nickname. And so just little things like that it does. Like, it's like, well, here's the thing I know. Maybe that'll answer your question, right? Yeah.
I also like the fact that on the Anne Rutledge question, it was vague, there's discussion, whatever. This one, it point blank says, however, there is no historical evidence to suggest that Mary Todd ever called off their wedding. Like, and you know, not that she didn't call it off, but that she ever called off the wedding.
Well, because I think one of the stories, right, is that she says, I release you, right? So, like, in that interpretation, absolutely, she calls off the wedding, right?
Yeah.
And so,
So, that's the end of our pre-recorded questions and our planned questions. So, we can switch now. We had a couple that we talked about asking. I've got them written down here. We were going to ask, how many documents did Abraham Lincoln write? Because that's a kind of a wide open, something that nobody knows. So we were going to ask that one. Do we want to start with that?
Let's give it a shot.
Sure. Okay. So. Sorry, I type slow.
100 people watching you. Slow down.
Right? So the voice was computer generated. We did that in advance. The ChatGPT actually doesn't have that voice built in.
It's giving you a really long.
Yeah.
So let's go, I'll scroll up here to the top.
But it's still the freshman student answer.
Yeah. So it's basically giving us that he wrote numerous documents throughout his lifetime. It doesn't give us a number. Does it say in its final, these are just a few examples.
No, it never gives a hard number. It just
Yeah.
says wrote thousands of
Thousands.
letters.
And then it'll point highlights out.
Yeah. So again, it's doing the student thing where it's
Razzle
throwing out a
dazzle.
bunch of information.
The student would have said hundreds. It said many.
Very, very many.
But it's good. Like, I haven't been doing a lot of praising of it, so I should do more of that. It's good about the Emancipation Proclamation. It knows that the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free enslaved people everywhere, that it only freed them in the Confederate States. So that's good. I think it gets pretty much all the descriptions of the documents are all right, I think.
I mean, the first inaugural does a few things, but.
Yeah, I mean, you could say more, but I mean, those aren't terrible summaries. Lincoln's prominent documents. He also wrote luminous letters to friends, political allies, and military leaders. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad.
What grade were you giving?
Depends what grade I'm.
Yeah.
No, I'm teaching.
That's unfortunately with ChatGPT, I can't close the side window, and that's the best we were able to get it dialed in today. So I apologize for that.
I feel like you want me to.
Do you want to read it? Yeah, you
Well,
read
we
it.
can read the next one because it's.
Okay,
It's,
we'll read the next one because the next one's going to be good.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun with this when we asked it last time,
It might have gotten better by then.
yeah,
or it
it's
might have
true.
gotten worse.
Worse, yeah.
I don't remember its answer for this one. I absolutely remember its answer for this.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Right.
Oh, it's going.
Thanks.
It's
I think you have to
thinking
scroll down. I think
I'm
it's
going to,
generating.
yeah. Yeah, it's generating.
We asked it to rewrite the Gettysburg Address for a modern audience. And I will tell you that it totally blew this last time.
Yeah.
Friends, fellow citizens, and honored guests, we gather here today on this hallowed ground, united as a nation, to remember the sacrifices made and the lives lost in a defining moment of our history. It is a time to reflect on the enduring principles that bind us together. Our great nation was conceived in liberty, founded on the belief that every individual possesses inherent and equal rights. Today, we continue the ongoing struggle to ensure that these rights are preserved and protected for all. We stand on the brink of a new chapter, facing challenges and divisions that test the very fabric of our unity. Yet, as we confront these trials, let us remember the spirit of our forefathers and the vision upon which this nation was built. We must dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work. Oh, that's
Got it in there.
straight out. Yeah, that lies before us. It is our duty to strive for a society where justice and equality prevail. No longer can we tolerate the prejudices that divide. It's already longer than the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah.
Divide us and deny inherent worth of any person based on their race, gender. Whoa. Religion or background. Lincoln never talked about gender equality. Our collective efforts must forge. I get today's audience, right? Yeah. Our collective efforts must forge a path towards a more perfect union. It is incumbent upon us to ensure that government remains of the people, by the people, for the people. The last time we did it, right, that's the money line of the Gettysburg Address. It did not use that line. It was like, we don't need the best line of the whole speech. It actually uses it here, so it's gotten better. That it serves the interests and protects the rights of all citizens, but that clumsy phrase, just ruins it. In the pursuit, let us remember the fallen heroes who gave their last full measure of devotion, which again, it didn't include that last time, so now it knows to pick that up. Their sacrifice should inspire us to carry the torch of freedom and continue the march towards a more inclusive and compassionate society. Today, we rededicate ourselves to the principles of freedom, equality, and democracy. It already told us that. We must rise above the divisions that threaten to pull us apart and work together in harmony, striving to create a better future for generations to come. May our actions reflect the true meaning of liberty and justice, and may we stand as a shining beacon of hope and progress, inspiring the world with the enduring spirit of America. Thank you, and may God bless this great nation.
Lengthy?
Very lengthy, yes. Definitely
But-
not better than the Gettysburg Address.
Now have it do Everett.
But better than the first version.
Much better.
Substantially better than the first version.
I mean, it hits parts of the speech in this version, right? For the people, by the people.
Well, it copies and pastes them in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't know to do that last time, so it seems to have realized,
Yeah.
maybe that it.
Still trying
Draw
to
from
punch
the
him
source
up. though.
material.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still tries to punch him up. It's still full of, I mean, now again, for a modern audience, it's still full of like these kind of empty phrases that get thrown around about American unity and liberty, right,
Equality,
without much.
freedom.
It also reads into Lincoln. Like, what's interesting about the Gettysburg Address is Lincoln doesn't say what the new birth of freedom is, right? He says it's about equality and by the people, for the people, and all that, but he never outright says this is about racial equality or gender equality or anything like that. It's drawing meaning out of the Gettysburg Address that we've interpreted. So it's doing a kind of interpretation, right? It's spelling out for you in a longer, clumsier way what it thinks Lincoln was saying in the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah, I think it does this is a much better attempt.
Yeah, and it doesn't do a bad job of that. Sure, go ahead.
Since it did revise its version since the last time you fed it, ask the question, was there any critiquing of the first one that led to the change, or was this simply the algorithm that led to a newer version?
You typically get better results if you feed it, like if it answers something wrong and you tell it, then it knows that that's wrong, and so it knows to look in the future. We did not do that because we wanted the dumpster fire that was its answer the first time to share with you. So it has improved somewhat from what we had.
I mean, the last one was entirely empty platitudes about freedom in America. Like, that's all it was.
Yeah. All right. The last one we had was, what's your favorite Lincoln movie? Should we ask that?
Oh, yeah.
Because part of it, when in the introduction it wrote for itself, is it does not have experiences or opinions. So, what's your?
Although it did, right, to a sense, it just gave us an opinion.
Right.
It just told us what it thinks the Gettysburg Address is about. So
Right.
be careful with it saying it doesn't have opinions.
There you go. So it's basically giving us a laundry list of a few Lincoln movies. But it doesn't give us, and in the past when we'd ask this question, it would give us the, as an AI language model, I don't have an opinion, so, here are some movies you might like.
This time
I felt like it
just
gave us
focused
more
on-
movies.
Yeah, this
It
one,
did.
it focused on one movie.
So, yeah, I'm
It was your type.
fairly certain that, well, it was my typo probably that hosed us. So, should we open it up and see? Joe, where are you at? Is he in here?
Here.
There he is. So Joe has a wireless microphone. We're recording this for posterity's sake. So if you will be so kind as to wait till the microphone gets to you to ask your question, that way we will have your voice on the recording as well.
And so am I right that they can ask us a question, but they can also...
Yes.
I have a
Yeah.
question for Chat GPT, you can do that too.
Yeah.
Would you ask it, what are the three primary failures of Lincoln as president?
Sure.
I want to hear the panel's answers to that question.
Well, you can answer it while I'm typing. It's going to be a while.
Johnson's number one.
Yeah.
George McClellan's got to be two.
McClellan.
And did have a request from the back that when you get the live answers here, if you could try to read the answers out a little bit.
All right, someone else read this one, because
Jake, your turn.
I have to squint to see this movie.
I'll wait until it's done.
It's gonna give you huge.
It's a long one, yeah.
Maybe paraphrase it.
Is it okay if we paraphrase for
Yeah.
those in the back?
That's a good answer.
So
Yeah.
I can just we got the 3 reasons. Should I just paraphrase those?
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna need.
So go
need
to
scroll.
one.
That's what I'm working on. Sorry, now I'm having trouble scrolling. No.
Ooh.
Don't download the dictionary.
Now's not the time.
How?
Don't scroll up.
No, not
The
scrolling.
first one was civil liberties and the suspension of habeas corpus.
Right.
Treatment of Native Americans. It mentions the Homestead Act. The Dakota removal and execution, the Homestead Act of 1862. Does it mention the Dakota?
It doesn't mention the execution.
It doesn't mention the Dakota.
It doesn't mention the Homestead Act of 1862, which distributed lands taken from Native Americans. And Reconstruction challenges. While Lincoln is celebrated for his role in abolishing slavery, his approach to Reconstruction, the period after the Civil War, has been criticized. Lincoln favored a more lenient approach towards the Confederate States, seeking to reconcile and reintegrate them into the Union with minimal punishment. Some argue that his approach allowed for the persistence of systemic racism and failed to fully address the socioeconomic and political rights of newly freed slaves, setting the stage for the challenges of the Reconstruction era. You want to
Well,
dash
Brian, you
that
want to take
apart?
that third one? Because that's not. That's the one I have the most problems with, right?
Yeah, because we don't know if he had been harsher, if the response in 1866, the 2 revolts would have spread out and been much larger. Maybe they would have been revolts in 1866 all over the South, and not just in Memphis and New Orleans.
Well, and like it's saying he's lenient. Like, so yes, the original 10% plan and all that is lenient, but we also know Lincoln wanted black people to have the right to vote, which presumably he would have defended. So you could have had, I mean, yeah, we don't know, but Lincoln, like Grant later, might have been more willing to use military force and things like that to prevent white supremacist terrorism from keeping black people from voting, right? Which is, Johnson does not, right?
Yeah, but the idea of he was harsh on soldiers, particularly rank and file soldiers, their willingness to take up arms again, much more likely.
And what was the first one we had a hard time hearing? Believe it or not, we had a hard time hearing Christian. Is your mic fall off?
Oh, it did.
That's what I thought so.
I love that we didn't really notice.
I love that no one.
It was habeas corpus and civil liberties, which is something Lincoln is frequently criticized for. The way he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, he went after newspapers. He went after, he imprisoned people for political speech. Again, we argue about how much he did this and whether it was reasonable, whether it wasn't. I mean, that's a thing historians argue about, but it is something he's generally criticized for.
All right, we have a question right here.
I'm hoping to trip this thing up.
So are we.
Here's the question. Please analyze the most historically accurate portions of the film Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer.
Is it Hunter or Slayer?
I think it's Hunter.
Okay. Yes. The most historical part.
There was
It was historically
an
accurate.
Abraham Lincoln.
I'm even going to call it a film. Just
It's
being
very
generous.
highbrow.
Highbrow, yeah.
Yeah. And it's Vampire Hunter, correct?
I think.
Yes.
Okay.
You want this one, Brian?
I told you he was going to do it. Didn't I tell you? There was an Abraham Lincoln.
That's amazing.
So,
I love that.
Abraham Lincoln
answer.
was a real guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
We still can't scroll up.
still not let me scroll.
so what was that first point?
So number one was that it gets right the existence of Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham
Right.
Lincoln was an actual historical
Not a
person.
fictional person.
And he played a crucial role in American history.
Yes.
Yes. So there's historical events, the American Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg. His political career, he was president, and he had debates with Stephen Douglas, and that he was assassinated in Ford's Theater.
So I'll confess, and those of you who are volunteers know this because we just started a program, but I've never seen Vampire Hunter. Are all these things in Vampire Hunter?
Yeah.
Anyone who's
Yeah.
seen the film? Okay. I mean, I know I know number 1 is covered. But.
Is Booth a vampire in the film?
Yes.
Yes.
Spoiler.
Oh, sorry, spoiler.
Spoilers. And I know Gettysburg is, right? Because it's their vampire, right? Isn't Gettysburg like
Yeah.
they're killing the Confederates are vampires?
Yeah, I do like in the last paragraph, it talks about it's important to note while the film incorporates some historical elements, the majority of the plot and characters are entirely fictional, such as the concept of Lincoln as a vampire hunter. Who knew?
The one thing I thought it got right.
Yeah.
Right here.
Did Abraham Lincoln suffer from Marfan's disease?
I asked
We've
it that
asked
one
that,
too.
yeah.
So let's do that. Yeah. It's Marfan's syndrome, technically. Yeah.
Regular spelling on that.
What, of Lincoln?
How did we figure out?
Marfan's.
Marfan's was Marfan, right? Yeah. It gave a good answer last time. Spoilers. So we'll see if it gives a good one this time.
I'm looking for a better one this time.
Yeah, right?
So hopefully it's not too long that it scrolls off the screen.
Don't give me numbers.
There we go.
So the possibility of Abraham Lincoln having Marfan syndrome has been the subject of speculation among historians and medical professionals. Marfan syndrome is a genetic disorder that affects connective tissue of the body and can lead to various physical characteristics and health issues. Some experts have suggested that Lincoln exhibited physical traits associated with Marfan syndrome, such as his tall stature, long limbs, slender frame, and other features. Additionally, there are accounts of Lincoln having certain health conditions that could be related to Marfan syndrome, including his reported heart irregularities, and eye problems. However, it is important to note that diagnosing historical figures with medical conditions posthumously based on limited information can be challenging. Words right out of my mouth. Without access to Lincoln's medical records or the ability to conduct a thorough examination, it remains speculative to definitively conclude whether or not Lincoln had Marfan syndrome. Again, right out of my mouth. It is worth mentioning that medical understanding and diagnostic criteria have evolved since Lincoln's time. The notion of Lincoln having Marfan syndrome is primarily based on retrospective analysis and remains a matter of debate among experts. I think that's mostly a good answer. Yeah. For those who aren't aware, right, this is a controversy, and it basically explained to you, it gave you the answer I would give to even set the table for that, right, by saying this is a thing people have postulated about Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
But we really don't know.
Where does the heart stuff come from? Do we know?
I don't. The heart and eye stuff, I'm a little, right?
That wasn't there the first time. It was a much shorter answer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering
Is that a
on
thing?
the irregular heartbeat, no.
No.
But I'm wondering if it's drawing on the lazy eye.
Oh,
as
yeah.
far as an eye problem.
Right, with the mule and.
Yeah, if it's assuming that was an eye problem.
Yeah, you're right.
Because that's a semi-talked about.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Including, like I said, in this theater, if you've seen Lincoln's eyes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know about the heart thing.
No, I've never heard of
that's
an
a thing.
irregular heartbeat.
All right, any other questions?
Only when
Raise
Anne
your
died.
hand. Oh, way over here. Let me get a couple toward the front in the middle. I'll get to you. Hand the phone there. Here you go.
Hi, what was Lincoln's dream about prior to his death?
You want us to ask it that? Alleged. Good job.
So, Abraham Lincoln's alleged dream shortly before his death is a topic of historical debate and uncertainty. There are differing accounts of what Lincoln dreamed on the night of April 14th, 1865.
He didn't dream anything at all that night.
No.
Well, we don't. He wasn't around to tell us the next morning.
One popular version of the story comes from Lincoln's friend and biographer, Ward Hill Layman. According to Layman, Lincoln had a dream a few days prior to his assassination in which he saw himself in the White House walking through silent and somber rooms filled with mourners. When Lincoln approached a room and inquired about who had passed away, he was told it was the president who had been assassinated. Layman claimed that Lincoln had shared this dream with him and others. However, it is worth noting that some historians and scholars have questioned the authenticity of this account, as Layman's reliability as a historian has been called into question over the years. Ultimately, due to a lack of concrete evidence and varying accounts, the exact details of Lincoln's dream, if he had one at all, remain uncertain and subject to speculation.
I like this one because it's done something in this post that it hasn't in others, and that's look at the source and analyze the source and its potential validity. So it mentions Layman, Ward Hill Layman, the source, and it evaluates whether you can give any credit to this source. So it looks at the idea that it could be speculation or
now,
the source could be inaccurate.
But is that because historians have questioned Layman's credibility, and that's why it shows up in the answer, right?
Yeah.
Right, they probably found contradicting.
Yeah, Layman, he's questionable,
Right.
and so it knows that, so that's good. And I agree. You're absolutely right about that, Brian. But it does it gets confused again, right? It starts by, it's like Ian said too, like where it's flip-flopping, right? It starts by assuming we're asking about April 14th,
right.
And it yes-ands us. It doesn't know but us, right? Or yes, but it yes-ands us is like, yeah, he had a dream on April 14th. I mean maybe, but he was in a coma, right? And then he never speaks again. So it's dead wrong about that. And then it gives you an accurate answer after that. Oh, sorry, no pun intended. That gives you an accurate answer after that about this dream that Layman says he may have had shortly before his death.
All right, who was next? Right here?
My husband and I were listening to a book that's totally fiction, but they had the Gettysburg Address in it. And one of the comments they were talking about was, and this is the question, did Lincoln have or had symptoms of smallpox when he gave the Gettysburg Address?
How about, was Lincoln suffering from smallpox?
Yeah, that's good.
When he gave the Gettysburg Address.
I'm really glad this is a free event because I'd feel bad if you people had paid to watch me type. So basically, there's no historical evidence to suggest he was suffering from smallpox when he delivered the Gettysburg Address.
But he is sick.
Do you want to
Yeah.
ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Ask it if he was suffering from varolioid.
Is that what he's
Which
supposed
is
to?
a more minor version of smallpox.
Doesn't the person
And they-
he's with die of smallpox?
So William Johnson, well, is it smallpox though? I don't think, is the disease right? That might be what it's tripping up over.
VARILOID, I believe, is varolioid.
Yeah, it'll tell you.
Which was the 19th century name, well, one of the names they used
download
for
the
smallpox in that era.
I should have.
There was no, so I just give you the same answer. Experience all.
So Lincoln.
But it does say or a severe form of smallpox. So it recognizes varolioid as being a variation on smallpox.
Right.
But you're right. Like this is where there is a fine line here, right? Because Lincoln does get sick after he gets back, and William Johnson, who we mentioned earlier, dies from whatever they get. And I'm always reluctant to diagnose these people with whatever disease they had. But I don't think Lincoln had any symptoms yet. So like we assume he's already sick on November 19th, but he doesn't have any symptoms yet till he gets back. And then he gets really sick,
Well,
right?
and Thomas was sick in the White House too.
Right.
Yes, and Tad is sick, yeah, right.
The president had debated about whether he was actually going to go to Gettysburg
Right.
to give the remarks that day because Thomas was so ill in the White House.
Right. So they're all suffering from something. It kills a
William
person who goes
Johnson.
with him.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't know to tell you that, right? Instead, it's like, well, yeah, Lincoln got sick during his lifetime. Well, sure, everybody does. But it doesn't know to tell you, yeah, that
he was sick at the time.
That he was sick at the time.
Right.
Yeah, and Tad was, and William Johnson gets sick.
Any other questions? Right here.
I
thought I heard you earlier say that you gave Chat GPT feedback. Is that correct?
Yes.
We did, not on any of the questions that we've asked tonight, but on some other ones we were playing with. Like when it got it wrong about him being in Washington after he'd already left the House of Representatives, we corrected it and went, no, that's not right. And so it went back and then came back with an answer. It's like, oh, my mistake, and then it went through and kind of clarified.
Then how does it distinguish, like if someone were just to put in an opinion or something that's false, how
Right.
does it distinguish truth from?
Should we try
It's a great
that?
question.
Great question.
We don't.
Sure.
It doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't.
Danger, then.
The only thing that ChatGPT does is they do have actual living people going in and doing things. So just like if you go and you update somebody's Wikipedia page to something that isn't true, somebody at Wikipedia will correct that. Somebody at OpenAI, when it's brought to their attention that it's continually giving out wrong information on a certain subject, they'll go in and fix it in the system. So
you still need people.
Right.
And that's what Captain Kirk would do, right? That's how Captain Kirk blows up all these AIs,
Yeah.
right? It's
yeah. So
Any other questions? Right here.
Take that? Would you ask the machine, what did Karl Marx say about Lincoln's reelection in 1864?
I don't know the answer to this one off the top of my head. There's no curse words involved, right? Okay, just
Marx had a huge potty mouth. Says he saw it as a significant event, says where he published it. Marx believed that Lincoln's reelection. Marx believed that Lincoln's reelection and the continued success of the Union in the American Civil War were essential for the advancement of the working class. He considered the Union's victory as a setback for the slaveholding aristocracy and an important step toward the ultimate emancipation of the working class. Marx wrote that Lincoln's reelection was a triumph for the cause of labor and the progress of humanity. In Marx's view, Lincoln's government represented the interest of the industrial working class, and he saw the Union's victory as an affirmation of the growing power of the proletariat against the ruling classes. It's repeating itself a little bit, but it is important to note that Marx's views on Lincoln and the American Civil War were influenced by his own political and philosophical perspective, sure. So would everybody's. Particularly his support for workers' rights and the struggle against capitalism. His interpretation of Lincoln's reelection reflected his larger analysis of class struggle and social change.
Yeah. I don't know exactly, I can't quote what Marx said, but I think that's pretty good, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what it doesn't do is say that he wrote directly.
Yes.
On it.
And talked about if slavery was challenged in 1860, then now let us have it destroyed in your second term.
Mm-hmm. But it gets the context for that right, that it sees it as a victory for the proletariat against, yeah.
Nope.
Marx was not a fan of slavery.
Yeah. Marx famously said, slaves are sold once, and industrial workers sell themselves by the hour.
Yeah.
I have a question for the panel this time rather than ChatGPT. So we've talked a lot about interpretation tonight, and I was curious about, before we ever get to the 245 billion data points, the work that you all do as historians with primary source documents, context, things like that a machine will likely never be able to replace.
I feel like Jake's been talking about that the most with this stuff. Why don't you get a
I mean,
soapbox?
I think there are two things here. First, history is a method, right? It's not a trivial pursuit category, right? It's we use diverse sources within the context of what other historians have said to create new knowledge about history, which ChatGPT does not do. History is also a very human thing, right? Like creating a piece of art. You need to be able to take the perspective of folks in the past. I'm a Star Wars guy too, or Star Trek guy too, so it's like traveling to strange old worlds. Right? You have to sort of use the evidence to get with these subjects and then take their perspective to figure out what's going on in their time. And it's just, that's the work that ChatGPT will never be able to do. I mean,
And correlations that
I think
aren't
it's non-humanity makes it impossible.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's a great tool to start that work, right? I have no problem starting a research project by asking ChatGPT, tell me what you know about this, or give me the best sources for this, and then that's a great starting point. But
yeah, I was going to say it's not very good at correlating things across different fields. If you ask something about the civil rights movement, I tell my students quite often, things like the civil rights movement have connections in music, they have connections in art, and I've seen no evidence that shows that it's able to make correlations very strongly across fields.
And in my own research, right, so the music stuff, probably more than Lincoln, one of the things I tried to do in my music book was figure out which songs were actually popular, right? Well, the way I did that was I looked at a bunch of letters, I looked at a bunch of magazine articles, I looked at a bunch of newspapers, and I tried to figure out, what are people saying about this particular thing? How do these things contradict each other, right? And then try to figure out what was really happening, right? It's not going to be able to do that. I also want to point out that we are as nervous about this as the WGA is, right? As the Writers Guild is. That what it also has access to a bunch of websites like Google Books where our work is that we would prefer people paid for in our books. And so there's a real threat that as this thing gets its tendrils into different parts of the internet, it's going to start plagiarizing us and other people. And I forget what question we asked it. We tried to ask it a question that was from one of our books, and it didn't really know. So we're not there yet. But presumably we'll get there one day. And what does that mean, right? Can you sue ChatGPT for plagiarizing you, Yeah.
And the broader implications in the future, if historians are replaced and really big leaps in history are made in archives, and this just searches secondary sources and things that have been put online. This isn't going to an archive looking at collections and finding new information. It's regurgitating things that have been written about already.
Any other questions? Right here.
Is ChatGPT and its capabilities now like a really bright 10-year-old, but with its capacity to learn in 2 years, 5 years, will it get to be someone who can do those correlations? Someone, I already made it human. But will it have the power to make those correlations because it learns so powerfully and quickly? So instead of a bright 10-year-old, it's a fairly bright 20-year-old.
I believe that it can. I believe that it will. I believe that there's so much money tied into AI and the potential for its ability to replace labor costs is so high that people are willing to continually invest, even if that investment means digitizing more information, which makes more information accessible to ChatGPT. But we're talking, how long will that take? 20 years, 40 years, 50 years? We don't know.
Without us creating more knowledge,
right?
It's
until everything is scanned,
and even then, I go back to that point. It's not a smart 10-year-old, right? Because that dehumanizes a 10-year-old. It's still not human, and it doesn't have the emotional capacity to understand a human life.
Well, and it's still. I don't know that because what you were asking about it, parsing knowledge, and I'm not sure it's ever going to be able to do that, right? So if you ask it something about Lincoln's assassination, it's not going to know, and it has access to, let's say, every book ever written by that point, right? It's like the computer in Star Trek. It's not going to know that Bill O'Reilly's book is terrible and Edward Steers' book is good, right? It's how's it gonna know, right? And so, it might be able to tell you, here's what Bill O'Reilly said and here's what Edward Steers said, but it's not gonna know which is right? I don't know that's gonna tell you.
And I think an example might be if you asked it, how did Mary feel after the death of Abraham Lincoln or one of her children? It would say women and people often grieve when people die.
It jumps to the macro.
Right.
Still,
it cannot get down to those emotional feelings. The question will be, will there be some leap in sentience that will allow it to
And that's a
understand feelings better. And then that's scary, because then we're talking about
That's a whole different
Skynet.
question.
So
Yeah, then we're then it's over.
And one more question over this way. I was wondering when a Skynet reference was going to come out.
It was
tonight.
coming. It was coming.
Okay.
So since we're on the discussion of Lincoln's assassination, can we ask Chat GPT, what was Samuel Mudd's involvement in the Lincoln assassination?
Good question.
Tells you he was a physician.
Right. He was
says he visited him for a broken leg. Mudd claimed that he did not recognize Booth at the time, though some historians have challenged this assertion. Mudd's subsequent actions raised suspicion. He did not immediately report Booth's presence to the authorities, but rather allowed Booth and his accomplices to stay overnight. After the assassination, Mudd was arrested, so it tells you what happened to him. The extent of Mudd's knowledge and complicity of the assassination plot remains a matter of historical debate. Some argue Mudd was actively involved and knowingly aided Booth, while others believe he was merely an unwitting participant caught up in the aftermath of the assassination. So it doesn't know, I'll give a lot of plugs to Steers here today. It doesn't know about Steers' research where Steers uncovered that Mudd had more contact with Booth before the assassination than most people thought, which is pretty damning for Mudd. So it doesn't know that. Otherwise, it's not a terrible answer.
It hasn't gotten around to that book yet.
Hasn't gotten around to that book.
It's on its list.
Yeah.
It's on its reading list.
Yeah, nightstand.
Well, we haven't done that yet. Why don't you ask it, how do you get to, you say, what are your sources or whatever? Like, why don't you get it to tell us?
Yeah, show me your sources.
Show me your sources, yeah.
Pat?
Here's that nasty answer. Based on Whoa!
Yeah.
Boom goes the dynamite.
F. Sorry.
Yeah.
As an AI language model, my responses are generated based on a mixture of licensed data, data created by human trainers, and publicly available data. I have not been directly trained on specific sources regarding the Samuel Mudd case. I should note that while I strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, my responses may not always reflect the most current research or scholarly interpretations of historical events. Therefore, it's always a good idea to consult primary and authoritative sources or consult with historians and experts for a comprehensive understanding of the topic.
There you go.
Well, that's all.
Well,
drop the mic.
And on that note, I would say Chat GPT versus the historians. Historians have won. So, before we go, I would like just final thoughts. Ian, takeaways from the research you did with Chat GPT or from this discussion or just the future of where this is going for historians in general?
I think that there are good things that could come out of this. Having access to essentially every book that had ever been written about Abraham Lincoln, we can't hope to begin to recall that type of information. But at the same time, it doesn't have the ability to reason. It doesn't have the ability to weigh evidence and say, this comes from a good source and this comes from a so-so source like we can. So I think it'll, at least for now, will only ever be a tool in our toolbox. It's never going to replace us, at least for now. My computer overlords will tell me when I'm wrong.
I agree with Dr. Hunt. I think historians can sleep safely, and professors can sleep safely knowing that they can't be very easily replaced. What they do is actually create new information by going to primary sources, which Chat GPT cannot reach. So,
Yeah, as I've said a couple times already, I think it's an excellent tool. I think we were kind of hard on it at times tonight, but I think it's an awesome tool to add to that toolbox. But yeah, it can't take perspective. It can't create new historical knowledge like we do. And yeah, assuming we're not all in a computer program already, I think we're safe.
But then what's it good for? So, because like what I wanted out of it, like, so Ian and I had a conversation when this idea first came up, so the original concept for this was to be a lot more competitive between us and ChatGPT. And what Ian and I were like, well, it's gonna know the minutia, right? It's gonna know where Lincoln was every day. It's gonna know every regiment that fought the Battle of Gettysburg, and it doesn't. And like for me, that's what I think would be useful about having a computer, because a computer can spit out these precise facts and dates that my, middle-aged adult brain can't hold, right? And it doesn't do that, but I do think it will eventually. Like that's what I can see myself using it for, is getting it to tell you those kinds of things, because that's what just a bunch of data amassed into a database can do. But it can't do that yet, and that's kind of disappointing to me.
But I foresee that day.
I think so too.
When you're able to say the name of an individual soldier and ask if he was at a particular battle, and it be able to respond and show you, and then you ask for sources, and it be able to give you. It doesn't do this, but one day give you links to actually primary sources.
Which is what the computer in Star Trek does. So that's what I want. I want the Major Barrett voiced computer from Star Trek.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. We had a good time up here. I hope you did too. Thank you very much.